Every autumn, as the last apricots shriveled on the branches and the peaks around the village of Kaorun dusted themselves with early snow, travelers overflowed the mountain trails. Some came to hunt for rare herbs, others for the thrill of standing higher than the clouds. They arrived at dawn with bright backpacks and left well past dusk, often underestimating how quickly night swallowed the switchbacks. The villagers were used to the worried knocking. "My child has not returned. My husband isn't answering his radio." We saw only empty footprints turning in circles. Guides would rally and lanterns would scatter along the ridges like desperate fireflies. Sometimes they reached the missing in time. Other times winter claimed them without fuss. Mira, who was 9 and lived with her grandfather at the upper edge of the village, heard every anxiety that drifted down the chimneys. Her grandfather, once a renowned climber, had one stiff leg after a bad avalanche. Now he served as the night dispatcher who coordinated rescue parties. When the phone rang at impossible hours, he slid from bed and murmured facts until sunrise. Mira, sleeping in the loft, half-dreamed the conversations. Trail names, altitudes, descriptions of jackets. The names clung to her like burrs, so that in school the next day she struggled to calculate fractions, while her mind replayed snatches of radio static. One evening, soon after the equinox tipped the balance toward darkness, Mira walked home from the bakery with a paper cone of sesame twists. The sky bruised violet above the spires, and she thought about how many hikers laughed that time of day and said, "Just a little farther." At the footbridge spanning the torrent, she stopped. On the other bank, a family had released a cluster of balloons, leftover decorations from the harvest fair. They bobbed and glimmered in the cooling light, each stamped with a different symbol: a clover, a spiral, a tiny mountain. One balloon snagged on a pine bough and burst, scattering snippets of paper that the river carried off. Mira dashed along the plank walkway hunting scraps, but most had vanished. She captured one sodden square and unfolded it against her palm. "I wish for safe steps," it read in wobbly pink pen. It struck her then, sharp as sleet. Wishes belonged on the mountain, rooted rather than floating away. That night she waited until her grandfather's breathing evened and slipped downstairs to the workbench. She found his tin of spare bicycle tubes, a funnel, and the sleeve of bottled lantern gas he saved for emergencies. In the pantry, she confiscated a roll of thin parchment used for spring rolls. By moon glow, she cut the parchment into balloon shapes, sealed the edges around a drinking straw, and filled them with warm breath and a whisper of lighter-than-air gas. Before knotting each stem, she scribbled a wish. "May every path thread home. May the cold find no resting place in your bones. May fear dissolve like morning frost." She made 12 in total, one for each month to come, and tucked them in a basket lined with quilt batting. At 4 o'clock, the rooster shattered her courage. She crept back to bed with stained fingers and an impatient heartbeat. All day during arithmetic, her mind jittered. What if the balloons tore? What if her grandfather saw? But dusk arrived and nobody had discovered her secret. She ate fried rice, complimented her grandfather's walk-work, kissed his cheek, and asked permission to take leftovers to the abandoned goat field so the foxes won't steal from the neighbors. He waved her off, never guessing the real errand. The goat field perched on a ledge precisely where the last row of houses surrendered to spruce and larch. Decades ago, it had provided a tidy income of milk until a rockslide demolished the barns. Now the soil lay thin, riddled with quartz shards, unwanted. Perfect, Mira decided. Nobody would interfere. She knelt, pushing aside brittle stems, and pressed each balloon base into the earth as if planting tulip bulbs. The parchment crinkled under her thumbs. When she finished, she smoothed the patch, whispered, "Please grow," and raced home clutching the empty basket. The next morning, she ran back before school. Nothing, just frost-silvered dirt. But when she crouched, she felt a faint vibration, as though fizz bubbled through the loam. She laid her ear to the ground. A distant ringing, impossible but there. The sound a glass makes when coaxed by a wet finger. She grinned so hard her gums chilled. News of the first disappearance came 5 days later. A pair of university climbers had texted a selfie near the tundra line at noon. By twilight, a blizzard slammed the range. No further messages. Rescue teams all over the valley mobilized. Mira's grandfather limped to the command shed, radio strapped to his chest. Mira followed, lugging thermoses of barley tea for the volunteers. While adults pored over maps, she wandered to the porch and stared toward the goat field. Snow stitched the air. She doubted even a lighthouse could penetrate such confusion, let alone buried balloons. She lingered until sleet soaked her socks, then trudged home alone. Along the path, flakes illuminated and extinguished under the single street lamp. She felt the ache of impotence so strongly she almost turned back for the balloons she had yet to plant. Maybe she should release them into the sky. Tradition be damned. But wind slapped the idea away. Up above, the peaks dissolved into darkness. The climbers were found 2 days later, half sheltered in a stone recess, alive but severely frostbitten. They claimed they had followed a green glimmer in the storm, something that shone through whiteout like an emerald star, wavering but steady enough to steer by. None of the rescuers reported carrying such a beacon. Mira, listening unnoticed from behind a stack of oxygen canisters, covered her mouth to contain a joyous yelp. She sprinted the long way home, ascending the Goatfield slope despite thigh-deep snow. Where she had buried the balloons stood a sapling no taller than her shoulder. Its trunk radiated mint light, subtle yet undeniable, the glow brightening where the bark thinned. The needles were translucent, laced with liquid sparks. Each pulse of color corresponded to the humming she had detected in the soil days earlier. Her boots crunched through ice as she circled the little marvel, weeping with confused relief. One tree grown from one balloon. 11 to go? Or would the single tree handle every wish? Winter tightened its grip. Whenever new storms barreled through, the tree waxed brighter. The village noticed. Kids invented dares. Touch the enchanted fir and earn bragging rights. Adults fretted aloud. Is it radioactive? Should authorities study it? Someone wrote an editorial in the weekly paper suggesting it might be a stunt to promote tourism. But then a trio of birders went missing on the ridge and returned praising the glow tree that sang like a bell tower. Skeptics hushed. Mira understood instinctively that revealing herself would endanger the tree. Not because the villagers were cruel. They would just smother the mystery with caution, fences, and signs, until it became another trimmed hedge in a botanical garden. So she kept silent, though secrecy pricked her conscience each time her grandfather rubbed his damaged knee, and wondered aloud how any torches could burn in such weather. February brought a freeze so severe that electric lines snapped and the whole valley spent nights by woodstove flame. One midnight, through the crackling hush, Mira heard voices outside, the kind of panic wrought by hope and terror clashing. She wrapped herself in quilts and peeked out. Shadows moved along the road, dragging sleds. She slipped on her boots and hurried after them. At the goat field perched half the village. They held lanterns, headlamps, battery floods. In the center, the luminescent tree no longer glowed. It blazed, a pillar of aquamarine fire without heat. Its branches arced wider than a wagon, and from every tip dangled seed-like pods the size of apricots, each flickering as though containing restless lightning. Snow around the roots had melted into a shallow pool that reflected the frenzy in warped green mirror ribbons. At the base knelt the school janitor, Mr. Yora, cradling a teenage boy Mira vaguely knew from shop class. The boy shivered violently. Between spasms, he whispered, "Followed the lights. Followed the lights." Mira's grandfather arrived, breath shaky. He and two friends went to test a new snowboard route, he told the onlookers. They radioed they were lost when the storm set in. Yora found him stumbling near the pass, shouting about trees made of wishes. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some turned their flashlights on the branches as though trying to decode the pattern of glow. Suddenly, several pods detached like candle drips and floated downward, hovering at waist height. Each unspooled a thread of pale filament that brushed the snow. Yora gasped. "What in heaven?" One pod drifted to Mira. She extended an unsteady hand. The husk felt weightless, but inside thrummed an almost microscopic heartbeat. She remembered what she had written. "May the cold find no resting place in your bones." Warmth seeped through her mittens, racing up her arms, banishing the sting of sleet from her cheeks. The boy inhaled, less ragged. His eyelids ceased flickering. He blinked up at the branches as if seeing them clearly for the first time and mouthed, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Mira saw her grandfather staring, jaw clenched, at the tree, at her, at the pods hovering over the crowd. Their eyes met. She could read the avalanche of questions forming behind his pupils. But thunder rumbled up the canyon, another blizzard inbound. There was no time for confession. Rescuers carried the boy away while the pods returned to the bows and stilled. The assembly dispersed, dragging footprints across the slush that refroze as soon as lantern beams passed. Only Mira and her grandfather remained. He stepped closer, examining the trunk's veins of light. In the hush he spoke as though they were inside a cathedral. "I know that glow," he said. "Saw something like it years ago when my climbing party was pinned by icefall. A shimmer where no campfire burned. Thought it a hallucination." He looked down. "Was it you?" Mira's head felt suddenly too heavy for her body. She opened her mouth, closed it. The truth pushed against her ribs. In answer, she slipped off her mitten, unbuttoned her coat pocket, and drew out the final parchment balloon she had yet to plant. This one bore the wish "May fear dissolve like morning frost." Her grandfather took it from her palm with infinite gentleness. "You planted them?" She managed a nod. "I didn't know they'd turn into this. I just wanted hikers to find their way." He turned the balloon under the green light. The wish words shone. Then he chuckled, rusty but warm. "You've always been better at navigation than the rest of us." He kissed her forehead. "Let's get inside before we freeze." No lecture, no orders to dig up the tree. She wept silently all the way home in gratitude. Spring pried open the valley like a yawn. Snow retreated, revealing carpets of pasque flowers. The glow tree's radiance dimmed to a soft pulse visible only after dusk. Mira checked it daily. Pods matured and fell, each curling into the soil. From each sprouted seedlings, thin hair-like stems tipped with an ember dot. She counted 14 one week, 26 the next. They spread beyond the goat field, creeping along the hillside like a galaxy arranging new constellations. With growth came upheaval. Researchers from the capital arrived, citing environmental duty. They strung caution tape and installed motion-activated cameras. Tour buses rumbled up the valley, scaring marmots. Vendors hawked wish sapling glow sticks and neon cotton candy. Guides offered twilight tours, though they were required to stop at a rope perimeter. Mira ached at the commodification, but kept perspective. No hiker had been lost since winter. The lights, now numbering in the hundreds, mapped a gentle curve from the village to the high pass like runway beacons. Drones filmed the spectacle, and a viral montage of aurora-colored trees swaying in mountain wind earned millions of views captioned Nature's Lanterns. Still, few knew the origin. Then one afternoon a flatbed truck groaned up the goat field, loaded with portable fencing panels. A company had purchased rights from the bankrupt goat farm heirs to build an observatory resort and spa. Construction would require removing non-native tree anomalies according to permits. Scientists protested in polite interviews. Hikers signed petitions. But the Valley Council, dazzled by promises of jobs, approved the development. Mira felt as though the mountain itself had shifted under her. She marched to the community hall where glossy brochures depicted infinity pools overlooking glow trees. Raising her hand, voice trembling, she asked, "How will lost hikers find their way if the trees are gone?" The project manager replied, "We'll install solar path lights. Much safer, little girl." Her cheeks burned. Little girl? Had they followed a solar stake light through a hurricane of needles? Had they witnessed a wish-heal frostbite? She wanted to scream that the trees were alive, that they chose to guide, that they grew from a child's desperate faith and the compassion of the mountain itself. But the assembly would only scoff. On the walk home, she passed a cluster of first-grade boys hurling rocks upward, trying to dislodge a glowing seed from a sapling. She chased them off and cradled the bruised branch. It occurred to her the grove needed a guardian louder than she could be alone. That night, she and her grandfather drafted a plan. They sent letters to every hiker whose rescue had involved mysterious lights, asking for testimonials. Within days, accounts poured in. A solo trekker in July fog led down to safety by green lantern strings. A snowshoer who followed an orchestra hum to shelter. A botanist whose twisted ankle flashed pain-free when touched by a drifting pod. Mira compiled the narratives into a book titled The Mountain's Wishes. Her grandfather leveraged his contacts, journalists who still owed him favors from daring rescues decades ago. Online forums erupted, "Save the Wish Grove." A drone pilot released footage of pods guiding a lost dog back to the village, set to lilting piano music. Donations flooded a conservation fund. A law student offered pro bono work exploring heritage status based on cultural significance. Still, bureaucracy slogged forward. Bulldozers scheduled arrival for mid-August. On the eve of their ascent, a thunderstorm brewed hotter than any in living memory. Sheet lightning forked between summits. The villagers unplugged appliances and huddled by windows, watching power lines sway. Mira threw on her raincoat, ignoring her grandfather's plea to stay. She sprinted toward the grove, heart prying at her ribs. If the machines tore through roots, would wishes scream? Mud sucked at her boots, but she pressed on. At the fence she halted, breath a-wheeze. Every tree surged white-hot. Light spilled over the hillside like paint, saturating rain, turning droplets to opals. Wind slammed her but smelled of lemon balm. Then, impossible yet unavoidable, each trunk bent, flexing with liquid grace, uprooting without ripping the earth. Roots slid free, leaving neat sockets that filled instantly with rainwater. The trees straightened, now unanchored, and began to drift upslope, carried by currents Mira could not see. Hundreds of glowing forms ascending through lightning, a caravan of floating constellations. She stumbled backward, awestruck. The trees glided past, branches kissing her shoulders, pods brushing her cheeks with tingling electricity. Ahead, the path closed around a blind corner. The procession disappeared one by one, swallowed by storm. By dawn, the grove was gone. In its place lay only smooth, wet soil, and near the center a single parchment balloon half buried, its ink blurred but readable. May fear dissolve like morning frost. The construction company arrived to an empty field and cursed the delay. Crews searched ravines, assuming vandals had relocated the saplings. But the hillside gave no clues. Council members convened in confusion. Contracts dissolved. Without attraction value, investors withdrew. Weeks later, a backpacker stumbled into a ranger station 2 valleys east, babbling about a forest of stars that walks. Subsequent sightings came from further ranges, always the same. Night travelers guided by glowing trees that hummed like prayer bowls, then waking to find the forest vanished. Mira understood then. The wish trees weren't hers to keep. They belonged to those in need. Like weather systems, they would migrate where safety was scarce. She mourned the loss personally, but celebrated its meaning. Autumn returned. Apricots shriveled again. The high pass remained treacherous as ever, yet no one was lost that season. Travelers reported faint melodies at dusk, as though a choir of glass sang behind ridgelines. Mira sometimes hiked alone to the abandoned goat field. There she would plant new parchment balloons in the hush between heartbeats, not to tether the trees back, but to remind the mountain that someone still believed. Because wishes, like seeds, are small, persistent things. Wherever they touch ground, they listen. And when darkness thickens, they rise luminous, carrying the earnest hope of a child farther than any map can hold, guiding the weary, dissolving fear like morning frost, one glowing step at a time.